Mark Brooks, I am so pleased to be speaking with you all the way from, dare I say, sludgy London.
Oh yeah, yeah, sludgy and freezing London, absolutely freezing.
I heard there was a bit of a sprinkling of snow.
Yeah, there's been snow, but there's been floods in the north of England and the Midlands as well. So it's we're lucky in London. Sludgy and freezing is fine compared to sadly what others have had to put up with. And of course,
Yeah,
UK so compressed. When I'm talking about the Midlands or the North, I mean the North is only 200 miles away from where I live.
that's right. That's right. I mean, the UK is about the size of the state that I live in, of Victoria
Yeah.
here in Australia. Now, I love to talk about how we know each other. And I didn't realize this, but we've actually been connected as best friends on LinkedIn since 2016. So have been following each other's work since then. And of course, we do collaborate at Global Action on Men's Health. And I did recently just miss you when I was in London visiting.
Yeah, that was a real shame, I have to say. But yeah, it's great, and I love LinkedIn, and keeping in touch with people in a kind of closed network. I think it's really good. And yeah, I've been following your work for ages. It's real inspiration,
Oh, thank you
certainly.
very much. Thank you. I love it. Love men and their issues. But I had a look on some other socials, and it's quite apparent that you are quite a bit of a music enthusiast as well, who loves curly whirlies, and I'm a curly whirly fan.
Yeah, there's an infamous picture of me last year when my wife went away for a weekend, a long weekend, and the picture showed what I was going to eat. I mean, it's an old trope of mine, actually. So it was tins of baked beans, sausage rolls, and curly whirlies, and
But
the
I
amount
noticed
of
this. I noticed the tin stuff was like spaghetti bolognese and things that looked really like it would cause a car crash in your insides.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, I mean, although physically I'm in my early 50s, mentally I'm still 19. So that was that was how I used to live as a student. And to be honest, before I got married, I was in my late 30s. I was still living like that. So toast, ham sandwiches, and warmed up sausage rolls were the staple diet of Mark Brooks.
Well, yeah, I wasn't going to sort of flip to that so quickly, but you obviously aren't born and bred in London
Yeah.
by the accent. Where were you dragged up in the UK?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, in southeast London.
Yeah.
So I'm in Belvedere, which is Latin for beautiful view, and it was given that name about 500 years ago by the first bigwig who set up a big house. Because from where I live, you can see for uh, 10, 20 miles. But the thing was, it was a beautiful view when he was around. But now, when you look at from the top of the hill, all you can see are power stations and sewage works. So,
Nice. Nice. So
so
is that where you were raised as well?
yes, it was. Yeah, yeah. So that's where I'm from. Yeah, I've got this kind of
Well,
very
pardon me, because
monotone.
I thought you may have come from a bit further north.
No, no, this is a typical monotone Southeast London voice, very robotic. There's quite a lot of words that I can't actually say.
Yeah.
And when I hear and meet people, if they've got my accent, it's really distinct and I can pinpoint within a strip of land just south of the Thames exactly where they're from.
Yeah. Well, it's a remarkable place. I've not been to London since 2019, and I was really very taken with their diversity and multiculturalism. That's really popped. And in such a good way as well.
Mm.
I mean, I was a
Yeah.
visitor, but it felt really very rich. So.
Mm.
Now, you've also chosen the music for the show today, which I'm going to be playing throughout the show. And you love a bit of vinyl, do you?
Yeah, 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 lots of vinyl. I'm still buying it. So, and some of it, my wife keeps saying, "Oh, how much is this worth?" Some of the original stuff that I bought in the 80s and 90s, but yeah, very much. I mean, I've been big supporter of vinyl coming back, and I'd always been a supporter anyway. So I've got about 500 albums, and they're all in alphabetical order by band, of course. So they're
Right.
so, and that's really important. And when my wife moved down some years ago, she's from the north of England. She brought some of her records, and the first record is an ABBA record. So alphabetically, it's right at the start,
Is
and
it the
it's
Abbott
like,
arrival?
yeah, it is. And the thing is, it's a real issue because obviously I've got all of these lovely vinyl records in alphabetical order, and the very first one now is an ABBA record.
Yeah, so you get judged on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, on that, let's jump straight in, shall we? Your involvement in men's health, it is very impressive. But it's spanned way more than probably 25 years because you are a man and you mentioned that had entered your 50s. But can you take us back to the beginning when you started actually really wading into the advocacy piece?
It starts in some respects at school because I always was, if you like, a working class anti-establishment campaigner and doer. And I'm very from a working class background, sound very working class London as well. And where I live, we've got grammar schools, and grammar schools for those who don't know, you have to pass exams to get into. And by and large, the people at grammar schools are very middle class. So I really stuck out like a sore thumb, and hardly anyone from my local community went to the grammar school. And then I went on to university, and again, late 80s, no one in my community went to university. It just wasn't a thing. And so I always therefore saw barriers that I had faced because of people judging me by my accent, or not always being as modern as they were, because you just didn't know from the background I was from. And therefore that kind of really hardened into me wanting to make change and make difference, and also um, trying to fight against what I would say injustice and discrimination and barriers which were unmerited. So that's the kind of school. My dad was quite anti-establishment, van driver.
Ask you a
So
little about some of those things that you challenged, that you championed. What was something specific there?
well, a good one actually was when I was at university. Now, and there was a war. I think the UK and the USA were conducting against Iraq because they'd invaded Kuwait. I mean, this is some time ago. Now, I was quite comfortable with that. Um, but a lot of my friends weren't. And I remember the student union started to close down the debate on it because they didn't want to offend some students from the Middle East. And even though I didn't agree with them, I stood up for my friends in terms of freedom of speech. And I realized that it was really important to actually stand up for your core principles and also stand up for injustice wherever you found it. And it gave me a voice because it gave me some confidence to actually start to move forward with that. And what I've tended to do since then is three things. I mean, I've tended to work in charities, so I'm a volunteer in most of my work now, but I've worked for an education charity and a disability charity in the communications field. I also obviously got involved in these men and boys issues, but also I tried to get elected as well to Parliament four times now, and haven't got elected. And my best chance was actually last year, and it didn't come to pass. But we won't dwell on that too much. It's a pretty sore subject, but nonetheless,
Could I just interrupt and go
yeah.
back to when you were speaking about injustices at school and where you came from? Did you experience any of that in the last election run?
Not in the last election because I was trying to get elected where I live. But certainly there's been times when I've been trying to get a parliamentary seat in different parts of the country where people have judged me on my accent because said I sound like a chimney sweep. And when I go to posh parts of or quite well-to-do upper middle class. I know class system's very much still an English or a British thing, but it is there. People make judgments on how you sound, not on what you say. And certainly I would go into some selection meetings where I'd wipe the floor with the other candidates, but the other candidates got through because they sounded better.
You sound, but you sound like you should be on a movie,
Yes,
an animated movie. I say that with great respect.
no,
Um,
exactly. No, and Taken as well.
yes. Um, with all of that, and we move sort of into the topic of men's health and what you do there and the impacts that you make. Uh, were there any of your personal experiences that springboarded that passion for you?
Um, I often get asked that actually, and I think it comes that there isn't actually. I mean, I haven't been a victim of domestic abuse, and my entry into the area was around male victims of domestic abuse, and I chaired the Mankind Initiative charity for nearly 20 years now. But I mean, my entry into that was I was an elected local councillor, which is far different from being a member of parliament, and I'd helped a chap with two kids get rehomed who was a victim of domestic abuse, and that's what sparked my interest in that. But I was already interested because I could see other communities moving on, as middle class communities which I talked about. But where I live, still very working class boys not doing well at school, starting to see an increase in crime. Also, because I was starting to take up senior roles in charities, I started
These
to
charities
see
were in disability and
education.
action, so not
Yeah.
specifically boys.
Yeah, not specifically boys, but what I was seeing through there was a number of young men and middle-aged men who were disabled, who were not being taken seriously in terms of getting work because the disability charity was about getting disabled people into work. So I was starting to see barriers around employment because around them being men, and
What
so
sort
it
of
kind of
year are we
started.
looking at here, Mark? What sort
I'm,
of
I'm looking. I'm looking at the noughties here.
right? Okay,
So not that far. I mean, we've moved on a lot now. I mean,
yeah.
I'd like to think some of the charities I was working for, because I was the comms director, so part of my work was trying to change the political and societal narrative. But all of those sorts of things come together. And so there was no one point. I started to get involved in working with a great friend of yours, Glenn Paul, for example, when he was in England, and therefore
And that was
I was.
around stopping male suicide. Was that
Yeah, that's around.
that
Yeah,
is it?
around then, and that was around the late 90s. Uh, but more around kind of 2008 to 2010, and I'd kind of moved on politically, but also in terms of my work become, sitting on.
Go back to, because we're speaking to a radio audience here of people who have
Yeah,
no idea who you are. So I have to keep on pulling you back to
yeah, that's
clarify
right.
some things. When you spoke about your experience with seeing people who had experienced domestic violence, being, was it boys?
No, men.
Men.
Yeah,
So you said that was sort of your entry into that
yeah.
space, which is a very, it's a very, very sensitive area and very, I guess, unpopular topic, and continues to be. But was that the thing that really, really lit you up around, that was the change that you wanted to make, or the place that you wanted to influence?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And
Why? Like why? Like what was the thing?
well, I because it was just clear injustice. Um, and once that chap come to me and I helped him get rehoused, I started to look deeper into these subjects because I hadn't read about them, not just the domestic abuse, but some of the literature around men and boys. And that was, that chap was the spark because I'd spent a lot of the time, previous 15, 20 years, trying to build a career, professional career. And therefore, I started to look at wanting to do something else, and that issue sparked real interest. So I then found the Mankind Initiative. This is, the start of the internet, if you like. They were already up
Can
and
you can
running.
you just describe the Mankind Initiative for our
Yeah,
audience?
so the Mankind Initiative is a domestic abuse charity, specialist one for men. So it's based in southwest England, but it supports men right across the UK. And we run a helpline. We've got a really popular website. We run some survivor recovery courses, but also the key part of our work is being to work with police forces, health services, local government to make sure that they're providing really good services for men who are victims of domestic abuse in their community, including, and obviously a key part of that is trying to influence society and government. And so it's a charity, registered charity. So I've been the chair of that charity for nearly 20 years. So I
And
contacted them.
and would it be fair just that there's nothing else really like the Mankind Initiative in the world that is so public and
I,
involved?
I would say so. I
Mm,
would say so. I mean, we've helped a lot of, well, certainly we're the forerunner and still, I'd
yeah,
say the
I mean we
principal.
have Dads in Distress here, which does
Yeah.
amazing work, but it's not so publicly about domestic violence against men, which is still very hard for people's ears to hear.
Yeah, very much so. In term, there are other charities now, but we've helped them along the way. So, there are some charities in Scotland, for example, and then there's other charities around England. It's a great charity in Ireland now, Republic of Ireland, and we're starting to see more services and focus popping up around the world. But I mean, we've been at.
Around violence towards men.
Yeah, domestic violence against men. So we are seeing more focus on that. But I have to say we've been at it for nearly 25 years. And I
Yeah.
think where I've come in, excuse me, where I've come in is that I've been able to combine my business experience working at high levels in charities and also my political experience. So I've been able to combine the importance of running good organizations that are growing, financially stable, and continually moving forward,
Yeah.
as well as trying to change the political narrative at the same time. Because a lot of the barriers that men face in this field isn't just about the lack of service provision, it's about the lack of recognition as well. So the advantage and experience of working in business and in charities is that you're not just trying to provide a brilliant service, you're trying to change the environment that the service operates in. And that kind of business and political experience has really helped me in all of my advocacy work on men's health and domestic abuse, boys' education, because
But
you have to
you
change
talk
both.
about it helping you,
Yeah.
but in terms of helping the people that need it the most, you're probably very aware of the work that we do at Global Action on Men's Health in terms of really, really highlighting the policy gaps for men, especially around, men's mental health and other issues. So if your foray into politics, is that to affect policy change for some of these issues?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I'd got elected last year, my full focus would have been on men's issues, men and
Do you
boys
think that's
issues.
a reason why you may not have been successful?
No, no, actually, it was a vote winner. I mean, I think that what's changed, and I've been doing more political work in the last 5, 6 years, and I was working for a couple of MPs for a few years before the election, and one of the things that I was focusing on, and it comes back to this issue of providing services or reports and research. And that's why, the work on global action for men's health is so important, because if you want change, you have to produce evidence. And that means research and policy research, that it's not academic research. I often speak to a lot of academics because
Mm.
I've done this great academic paper, and it's like, but it's in hieroglyphics. I mean, unless you're an academic, you can't make head nor tail of it. And civil servants, officials, all levels of government, also employers, need things that are really accessible, and academic literature and is just not accessible.
No.
I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's just not accessible to the public, or
Do you
people
think
who
that's
make
why Movember
decisions.
has been a little bit more successful in getting a voice for men and boys? And we're going to talk about the upcoming men's health strategy that the UK have just announced and your role in that as well. But do you think Movember's languaging and literature is just so much more palatable to those decision makers that they can actually make sense of it?
Yeah, yes, yes, indeed, as well as other organisations as well. So, I mean, yeah, yeah, absolutely, because again, the point, and this is the thing that charities, when I was working with them, and for them, and that's why it's so powerful, because charities and other organisations, they take a lot of the academic research. They also, what's so powerful about the charities is that they take the academic work. They also take their lived experience of running services for men and boys, as well as making sure that the voices of men and boys are actually featured within that. And they kind of distill all of that and then produce policy reports, campaigns that actually speak to the audience that they're trying to influence, which is both society, employers, and also government. And it's almost like a translation exercise. But the thing is, you write the reports, that's not the end of the journey. And this is one of the things I've always been very clear on. So you produce your reports, you then make a series of recommendations, and that's really important. Recommendations, some of them can be quite far reaching, some of them have to be also like doable. So the art of politics is the art of the possible. So don't always try and push the political world and government too far, too fast, because they just won't be able to do it. So it's a step-by-step process, but you've got to push them and you've got to have recommendations. And then you've got to be pushing them to actually implement them. There's no point having research recommendations without implementation. And so the the whole process around the men's health strategy in the UK, we've got better services. I mentioned well, we've got services in every part of the UK now for male victims of domestic abuse. And there's a number of other policy areas that we're looking at, and part of that has been policy reports and evidence, recommendations, and then getting an influence and implementation. And I've written reports
You
last.
mentioned, sorry to interrupt you, just so
Right?
I can make sense of this. I love that you're talking about policy, because a lot of people, especially when people are talking to me about my work in men's health, it's like, well, what are you doing about it? I.e., why haven't you fixed it? And people don't understand that nothing can happen until there's, some framework around it and some buy-in and some policy, and then of course funding attached to that, and then the action, which, as you're painting the picture, it takes time, and when there's constant changes in government, that can really upset apple carts and change perspectives on things as well, especially for something that's not that popular, which is men's health. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and it's great to see that the 2025 men's health strategy in the UK has been recognised and realised, and there's a commitment to writing that this year. And I compare that, there's only 7 other in the world. I think, as Ireland has got a very good one, probably the best example of a men's health policy. We in Australia have also a very good one, which doesn't have money attached to it. So it's very difficult to bring this amazing piece of literature to life without funding attached to it. So how do you see the UK strategy? Is it got legs?
Yeah, it has got legs, and I think we'll make it have legs. I mean, that journey's been a long journey in the UK. I mean, it's been 15 years, and 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 I think one of the challenges that we've had with men and boys issues, including on men's health, and it's something I hadn't seen. And so when you're in business or charities, and you're trying to push societal change, you're just trying to push societal and political change, often without opposition. But one of the differences in the men and boys area is actually you're up against both opposition and indifference. And so you're not just trying to push a door open. Sometimes there's forces on the other side trying to slam it shut. And what really piqued my interest, what really triggered me, if you like, on men's health, was that about 10 years ago, the Men's Health Forum in the UK had written to somebody called a chief medical officer, and who's like the big wig in terms of health in the UK. And every year she wrote an annual report about a certain topic. And one year, so about 10 years ago, she wrote a big report on women's health, which is all fine and dandy, but much needed. So the Men's Health Forum and a few other organisations like ours got behind the campaign, and then wrote to her and said, well, that's brilliant, women's health strategy, much needed. Can we have can you do next year? Can you do a report on men's health? And she point blank refused. Point blank refused. And I was like so angry because
What, did
we
she
then
give a
went,
reason
okay.
for her refusal?
No, and that's what makes it worse. It's not just like, no, it's like, go away. I was so enraged by it because it's needed. Men's health is in crisis 10 years ago as it is now. But also it's just discriminatory. It's just not inclusive. And I then look on the health system, where our values are inclusion and all of this type of thing. Again, very worthy and needed, but actually their actions didn't match up with their values, and that really triggered me in terms of the men's health. That really got under my
How do you,
skin.
when you talk about being triggered and being angry, how do you separate, advocacy work where you've got to be very, very objective, and very focused on what the end goal is? How did you separate yourself and take care of yourself in that moment?
Experience, to be honest. So I don't take things personally, and I kind of I remove myself personally, um, s- from the subject. So I don't feel, um, uh, if you like, emotionally involved in that. I'm looking at these things. I mean, these are obviously a passion. I mean, when I said I was angry, I wasn't like throwing things around around the house or anything, but I was just so like, I can't believe, frustrated. I couldn't believe this. So I deal with these issues from a professional perspective. So I keep kind of personal and any emotional issues, I keep them to one side. And again, because one of the issues with a lot of people who have now luckily fallen by the wayside, who are involved in a lot of this work initially, was that they were very angry and very publicly angry, and they couldn't understand the importance of getting tone and style right,
Yeah.
and working in partnership. Things take time. You have to produce evidence. You have to keep at it, if you like, men's rights activists, for want of a
Yes.
better phrase.
Mm.
And they really, and I understood their frustrations, but they poisoned the well for lots of us, like Global Action for Men's Health and all the great organisations, Men's Health
Yeah.
Forum in Australia and others, and also here in the UK, because though, those who were indifferent or didn't really want to recognise men and boys' issues could point to them and then try and associate all of us with
Yeah.
those angry voices. Now,
Yeah.
what's
Well,
happened?
can I
Yeah,
just say, I remember,
yeah,
my early years of my wading into the men's health scene, and that was probably about 15 years ago. And I remember being quite interested in the men's rights thing. And that was my first sort of experience of, wow, men have no rights. And this is something that I felt angry about, and I wanted to do something about it. And I didn't last long feeling like that, because I quickly realized that I didn't like it. It didn't feel good, and it didn't feel productive at all. And that's, I guess, when I met Glenn Poole and joined the Australian Men's Health Forum, to have such a more balanced view about, men's issues are everybody's issues. It's an every person's issue. And how do we collaborate, as a whole community, global community, to bring evidence that, men do need specific kinds of support. And even then there was still this, yeah, but what about men? What about women? Women get all this stuff. And I remember to think, nah, this doesn't work either. It has to be another way. And then I reflected, as many people did, on the feminist movement, and that, those early days of the feminist movement, which women advocated so wonderfully for themselves with nothing. And there is so much to be learned from what women have done. And, that men probably just aren't very good at advocating for themselves. And that's probably where we need to be, is involving everybody in showing men, or showing boys, getting upstream and showing boys how to care for themselves in the first instance, where they have any chance of all at having a voice. And I think that's where I am right now, is, how do we all get upstream, influence how boys are being raised so that they can advocate for themselves.
Absolutely. Just dwelling on all of those. I mean, that was always the issue with men's rights activists, because they weren't producing services, their tone was wrong, and also they were just anti-women.
Yeah.
And this isn't a zero-sum game. I mean, we need women to succeed as well as men, and all ships can rise together. And Richard Reeves, who's a good thing, great thinker in this space, talks about that. And we can think two thoughts at once. And he wrote a really good piece just before Christmas about, if we want women to flourish, we need men to flourish too. We can't have floundering men, and because that will mean that women won't flourish as much as possible. And I think because there's been wise heads, yourself and Glenn and all the team at Global Action and across the UK, wise heads, experienced heads that we've been able to mainstream. There's still a long way to go, but we've been able to mainstream men and boys issues as areas that need tackling. We talked about men's health strategy, but boys' education around suicide, for example. Also, I'm particularly concerned around not just boys' education, men's health and domestic abuse, but also around skills for men in their mid to late 40s and upwards, reskilling, AI, where are those men going to find to be retrained and do more work. So I'm really into the employment and skills area, which will be a bit of a focus in a few years' time once men's health strategy is up and running. And you asked about that. I think the thing we've made clear to the government about the men's health strategy, and I actually wrote one with an academic last year, Caroline Flory,
Oh, yeah.
because again, I'll come back to the point about the policy. Right, so we're trying to push to get a men's health strategy, but that's not enough because if suddenly the government or someone says, yes, we want a men's health strategy, what do you want in it? If you haven't done that thinking, then it's like, oh, and then other people will write one for you, and it may be not what you think is appropriate. So I spent the summer actually writing a men's health strategy. And I took a lot from Australia, took a lot from Ireland, but a lot of it isn't about money. It's about culture change,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I felt needed in addition to the other strategies was that you need some people in government and in delivery systems accountable for delivering a health strategy for men and improving men's health. They have to be accountable. There has to be data. There has to be a strategy locally. You have to hold people to account because if you don't hold governments to account with measures, targets, and commitments, then it won't happen. And as my political nous coming in, it's like, oh, we've got a men's health strategy. And unless you're going to target a local health system to say we want to see a reduction in male suicide by 10% per year, they won't do anything.
No,
So
but then, even with the suicide piece, we still have this idea that suicide is this isolated thing that needs to be fixed again. But, everything leads to it. You look at domestic abuse, you look at, sexual assault of boys, you look at all of these unaddressed issues that lead to suicide. So suicide doesn't sit by itself. It is a result of many different issues that men face. And, I think when you look at a strategy is great to be this overarching thing, but then you look at things, as you said, how, service delivery, we look at our public health systems where our public health networks across the world are not educated about male-centric things. It's general practice, and which is quite often focused on women because women are reproducing human beings. So there's obviously a focus there. I actually said to one of my friends many years ago, I said, look across the Melbourne skyline and you'll see the Royal Women's Hospital, the Royal Children's
yeah,
Hospital. Where's the Royal Men's Hospital? And he said, why would you need one? And I mean, why wouldn't you?
yeah,
And
exactly.
men have no specific issues. And that's how it's viewed, is that men are kind of just this being that needs to be fixed, and that's about it. And
Yeah,
they should
absolutely.
do it themselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Glenn came up with Glenn Paul came up with this phrase, which is used now around the world. I mean, is that all women have problems, all men are problems, and I've added to it. So, and if men do have problems, it's their fault. So, um, yeah, it's a great phrase and a great framing of the narrative around this. And certainly, again, when the strategy isn't just about the accountability, but it's making the health system more accessible, more training, around men's health, especially for people coming through the health education system, at colleges, but also importantly about tackling gender and social norms and social determinants around poverty, around work, around education, literacy, all of those types of issues, which do take men down that path to suicide. And that's partly, I mean, I wrote a report a couple of years ago for a parliamentary group on male suicide, and we took evidence, including from Australia and the USA and the UK, around male suicide, and again, a lot of the talk in the UK was about we need a suicide prevention plan, but actually the plan is just dealing with the outcome and the sticking plaster. It's actually the reason you need a strategic approach is because you need to get into the root causes of suicide. And that's again with the men's health strategy. A key area was around poverty, class, lack of accessibility, all of those types of gender norms about men needing to man up, get through it, work with employers, all of those types of things really need to be fixed, because once we start fixing those things, suicide, as well as all different types of health conditions from, cardiovascular disease and other kind of cancers and all sorts of things will come down naturally because the health system and society really wants to look after and help men live healthier lives.
Yeah, well, do you know what? At the moment, I'm having fences built around my house. All the neighbours got together. Let's get new fences. So it's very, very hot here in Melbourne at the moment. So the fence men are here today, and I was having a chat with them, and they're two brothers. I dare say they're probably in their early 30s, but both have kids. And so they're sweating it out, and I hope they don't listen to this show because one did not look in particularly good health. I observed what they were eating for lunch, probably not the healthiest stuff. And I said to them, how do you go in this heat day after day relentlessly from 7 in the morning till 6 o'clock at night? You're digging holes. And they said, oh, yeah, we love working together because we're brothers. That's really cool. And I said, when you get home, do you have to look after the kids and stuff? Yeah, we do that. We love our kids. That's all great. And I said, what would happen if you couldn't come to work? And they just looked at each other and laughed and said, but we have to.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. I said, so if something happened to you, where's your family's livelihood? And they looked at each other and said, we just have to turn up. And there's no choice. There's no choice about turning up. So, I think these gender norms, again, that, I think men, how we raise boys to be able to have choices about how they live their lives. And how they can have everything. They can be married, they can have kids, and they can have time to spend with it. I think is, just one of those many things that does, reduce, the risk of suicide, reduce the risk of heart disease. It just reduces so many things by making those few changes just to give men more choices about how they live their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you take those two chaps. I mean, say if one wasn't able to work anymore in that field because of physical, come back to my focus in the next few years around employment and skills. So that chap suddenly, right, okay, I can't physically do this job. So how can he be, if you like, find a new career using those skills that he's got? Because you might want to go into teaching, teaching the fence people, the future, whatever. And or some other role, and again, because men need a sense of purpose, and I've been reading a lot, in that report, men want to be of service, they want a sense of purpose, need a reason to get up in the morning, and for me, a lot of that's just inbuilt in men. How we help them and how we mold that, and what the expectation is really important. but also one of the things, and again, I come back to this, why am I involved, etc. Because, I'm from a blue collar background. So my dad was a van driver. My dad, my middle brother's a plasterer, and everyone around where I live, I still live in my community, are tradespeople. I mean, I used to go down to the local station to commute into London, and there'd be like 100 people on the platform. There'll only be five of us in a suit, men and women. So it's very working class, blue collar area. And I've always felt that there's been this real white collar, blue collar divide, not only generally, but and I'm starting to see this big debates about working at home. But also with respect to health, well-being, safeguarding type policies, either employers or society. They're written by middle class people in offices, and they're all focused on, this is my new soundbite, they're all focused on Andy in accounts and not Dave on the drains. And the reason that triggered a lot of that was that I'm big into football or soccer, and I've got a local team which is actually absolutely useless, Charlton Athletic. I mean, it's awful. But in beginning of December, there was a game in the evening. It was perishing cold, like -5. And so I went to the game, it was freezing. And as I was coming out about 10 o'clock at night, there was about six guys freezing cold trying to fix water leaks, like a water outage in the street, work for Thames Water. So they're wrapped up, it's perishing cold, there's ice and everything everywhere. And there they are in the road, digging up the road to try and fix a drain. And I just thought, that was another light bulb moment. I thought, where is the health and safety around that? Where's the well-being? Where's the work-life balance? A number of them probably on short contracts or zero
There
hour
is but
contracts.
there is an expectation that they will turn up.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an internal expectation inbuilt in men, but also it's an expectation from the employers and society that they're
Yes.
men's jobs, and that, oh well, men do that type of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
No
and
gender
that's what.
equity in those roles.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. But and to be fair, I'll come back
Which
to
is,
that
yeah.
sense of purpose, sense of service. So
Can I just interrupt you on the sense of purpose and sense of
yeah,
service? Because I wholeheartedly agree with that, particularly in men who don't have that inbuilt purpose that we do. But with that purpose and with that service, there needs to be a plan. And I think that's the bit that's missing,
yeah,
that we identify that, that's what men do. Men risk their lives to protect, women risk their lives to create people. And
mm,
with that sense, with that inbuilt sense of service and those masculine traits, there still needs to be taught a life plan. How do you plan? So, for example, the drain diggers and the fence builders. So in school, build all the fences you want, because by the time you get to about 35, your body is going to be wrecked. So what is the plan? And the plan needs to be in place well before you dig your first trench.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And that doesn't
absolutely.
happen. That just doesn't
Yeah.
happen because boys, as you said, get behind an education very fast. They're branded as being lazy, or functional or distracting, whatever they are. They're often medicated for ADHD or something. And then by the time they get to about 15 or 16, I think it's best you could just go out and do a trade. So then they
Yeah,
start, and it's just like, it's not good enough.
I
We don't slack
absolutely agree
enough.
with that. And
Mm.
and that's a really good, and that's such a great perspective. And I think it's interesting because I wonder, because you're going to censor me now.
No, I
I
won't.
wonder if it, I wonder it, I mean, because I've never thought of that, and I've never heard that being raised in terms of like the need for men to have this kind of life plan, especially those working in blue collar roles. And I wonder, I wonder if that's because that's a female perspective, that because you're perhaps one step removed because you're a woman. I don't know. I mean, tell me if I'm completely off run. I mean, I've never heard that before
Well, I mean, I
about.
grew up with blue collar people as well,
Yeah, of
and I
course.
worked,
Yeah.
and I also did some work with a woman, Helen Lingard, here from Swinburne University, and her focus is on blue collar men and physical pain. Well, actually, one of
Mm.
her focuses is, and that lifespan of a boy. So you look at how boys play sport. You love the so the football.
Yeah.
You know, they go very, very hard. They are often injured right from a young age. And boys are often catapulted into hero status when they're injured and they're playing, which is just a terrible thing to happen. So they often start their occupations, and if they're blue collar occupations, they already have pre-existing injury. So by the time they get into their, mid 20s, even early 30s, they're in pain. But then it goes back to my fence builders. They can't stop working. They have to keep working. So there comes substance misuse, because the only way we can get to work is by medicating. And then that whole thing starts, and then all the labels start. He's an alcoholic, he's abusive, he's angry, he's all these things, and he's got every every reason to be angry, because he's in pain in every respect. His life is like, he can't see life, he can't see himself out of pain. Um, mm. And then
That's fascinating. That's such a fresh perspective. I'm going to go. I'm going to
can I
go
go
away
one
and
step
think about
further
that a
in
lot.
in that
Yeah, of
trajectory?
course.
Because
Yes.
that's when that man then gets discarded, because he's no longer useful, because he can't work. So then he loses access to his children. He loses all of his financial, what he's worked his whole life for. And that's where we see suicide, the trifecta:
Yeah.
loss of finance, loss of family, loss of self. And
Yeah.
bang, and then we go, oh, it's just another man. It's not just another man. It is a man without a plan. There you go,
Yeah.
coin that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's make the
Absolutely.
t-shirts. No man should be without a plan.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Yeah, don't have man without a plan, because if I'm wearing that t-shirt, I thought, yeah, yeah. Look at that guy. It's what's worse, he even admits it. So no, I won't. I won't. But yeah, that's a really sound perspective, and certainly on again on the suicide and the mental health issues, that was certainly where we had got to, about those kind of this blend. Uh, uh, we said it was kind of blend of three things, that there was external stressors like family, relationships, for example, finance, also that kind of lack of sense of purpose, or loss sense of purpose of self, and also when they're transitioning. So when they're moving from one life stage to another, whatever that is, and that's why you see spikes in suicides around going to, in some respects, going to university is an issue in the UK, but also coming out of the armed forces, and those life transitions in their 40s and 50s, where they move from one life transition to another. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also, trying to get through to public bodies that suicide is not a mental health problem, it's a life problem.
Right.
Um,
Situational
and
crisis accounts for so much, like the
yeah,
ones we just described. I actually just posted something the other day on LinkedIn. And it was a guy that had written about his 92-year-old grandfather who killed himself. And, men of a certain, I mean, I do a lot of work with the men's shed movement here in Australia. So that's men, often in those twilight years, that where suicide is very, very common, but no one cares
yeah.
at all, and can't understand why. But for all the things that you just said, especially that lack of purpose, it's literally, what's the point? What's the point of living?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that the thing is around the suicide debate, and this is where you get you get focus on fixated in one area. So a lot of the focus about middle-aged men, so 45 to 55, which is like the peak rate. But there's so much differentiation within all of the figures. I mean, about older men. I mean, in the UK, about 180 to 200 uh, boys under 18 die by suicide every year. No one talks about no one talks about that. I mean, obviously, there's even more. In terms of if you look at self-harm, which isn't necessarily categorized as suicide, but also come back to men in blue collar roles, generally at least double the suicide rate of men in white collar roles, and those debates just not being had at all because it's all about middle-aged men, and so those other groups get discarded or unrecognised. It's hard enough to get the issue on the table anyway. So when you're looking at nuanced groups, important groups, it's even harder to get any traction on them.
Also, the attitude, that the middle age suicide crisis for men, it's just assumed that that's probably going to happen. And it's like, yes, that's just what men do when they get to that age. And again, it's often dismissed as we know what the what is, but we don't want to understand the why. And, I work in private practice with men, and again, the amount of sexual assault that occurs in young boys where they've had no pathway at all for being able to do anything about that often will come up at that age also when those men have children themselves and are just terrified for them. And it triggers all of their stuff that's never been dealt with.
Absolutely, and absolutely, and some of the charities that I work with, especially there's a really vibrant range of charities in the UK dealing with male victims of sexual violence and sexual abuse, which includes those with you know trauma from what they experienced. So we've got a number of obviously children's charities, but a lot of adult charities dealing with sexual abuse and sexual violence, and a lot of the men that are coming forward to them are those actually talking about historical sexual abuse,
Yeah.
and certainly, so in the UK we need more, but we've got a lot of really good services
Yeah.
specifically around that issue. And
Do you think there's still a
politically,
lot of disbelief and disregard around sexual assault towards boys and men, especially rape, that it's disbelieved because it's like domestic violence? Quite often people will say, oh, yeah, but it's just psychological coming from the other side, coming from women towards men. And it's like, no, it's physical. It's like, oh, no. People just will not hear of it.
there is that pushback. I mean, there's been a number of scandals, especially in the churches, for example, and care homes around boys. So that has helped move the recognition because there's been big reports. The Archbishop of Canterbury actually resigned just before Christmas because he buried a report about an abusive man within the church. So there is more focus and more attention on it,
But it's
but
always in the institutionalized
really exactly.
areas, whereas we're not looking at the domestic stuff either, and we still won't fathom that perhaps mothers and sisters and nieces and nephews are capable of perpetrating that kind of assault.
Absolutely.
Mm,
There is still societal disbelief in terms of
mm, yeah,
that type of assault. Um, yeah, because it's just assumptions, especially around physical aspects as well as
yes,
the gender aspects.
yeah.
But I mean, the domestic abuse things have moved on.
I can
15.
ask you a question about
Yeah.
that. Where do you think shame and guilt sits with a boy or a man in terms of, to say those two issues, physical assault and sexual assault? in terms of men actually reaching out, men and boys reaching out for help? Where does shame and guilt play a role in that?
Yeah, I think it's front and center. I think it's absolutely front and center, because it it isn't just the shame and the guilt of the act. It really undermines a sense of what they have been told or what they feel means to be a man. And certainly when it comes to, be in control, like be able to control themselves, in terms of being, provider, protector, for example, being strong, stoical, all of that, it undermines that whole sense of self for men. And one of the things, when it comes to domestic abuse, where it's perpetrated by a woman, which is about 90% of this domestic abuse perpetrated against a man is from a woman, is that they risk not just the shame and the guilt, but also they fear being ridiculed, laughed at, not being taken seriously. And even more so on the domestic abuse front, where generally guys are bigger than women. So, I was speaking to a guy, just before Christmas, 6'4", been in the armed forces. This is like a guy who's like trained to kill. He's been on tours, of Afghanistan and elsewhere. And his ex-partner was like 5'4", and she
Mm.
was like not only physically assaulting him, but also the coercive control, psychological control as well. And so the shame and guilt front of center, but also the fear of what other people will think and
Yeah.
take you seriously is is because you are a man, because is really, really a problem. And that's a societal shift that we need to make, so that men and boys who are going through that don't fear that consequence.
Yeah.
They don't fear that they will be laughed at and ridiculed. Now, a lot of that's now in their mind, because there's a lot of, especially around domestic abuse, because there's been a lot of focus around male victims, or there's been a growing awareness. There's been some documentaries. We've obviously been pushing it
Yeah.
for a long time.
Mm.
So there's far more awareness now, and there's a real reduction in, men being not taken seriously, but men haven't caught up. So men still think that they won't be taken seriously, but
Well,
actually
but
they
also
find,
it's unsafe in many cases. Here, I know I've been involved in cases where the tables get turned if a man
yeah,
reports violence.
yeah,
He can have his children taken away. So
right,
there is a real fear of not being safe to
yeah.
do so.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, one of the barriers that I've always felt in the male space around domestic abuse, and I alluded to it, about not just trying to push the door open. It's like there's
Mhm.
people the other side trying to push it back,
Yeah,
which is quite unique in these types of fields. And certainly I've come up against resistance. I've come up against, not in front of me, but I've seen it, behind the scenes, myths being put out in the public arena about male victims of domestic abuse, back lobbying about we shouldn't do this, because it, it's not telling the truth about male victims or female perpetrators. So I've had all of that. I mean, there was some guidance from a government body, that said that the majority of men who are victims of, partner abuse, so it's domestic abuse from a partner or ex-partner, is from other men.
yeah,
And and it ended up in the in guidance, and I found it, and I'd been involved in the writing of the guidance, and I was like, how did that appear? And then when I went back to the body, Crown Prosecution Service it was, and I said, well, how's that appear? They said, oh, we were heavily lobbied to have that in. And I won't name the organisations and the people
yeah,
involved in that, but I was saying, but it's untrue. I said, A, it's untrue, B, it's homophobic because what you're
Yes.
basically saying is practically every gay relationship or the majority of gay relationships in the UK are abusive, which is
Yeah.
not certainly not
Not
true.
true. No.
And also, what was the motivation? And motivation was to try and minimise the acceptance that female perpetrators commit domestic abuse against men. I just couldn't believe it, and that was quite recently. So
Yeah.
there's always the challenge has been the minimisation around domestic abuse, but also that's the same
No,
around
but
men's
it's a distortion
health.
as well, and it also, I think I mentioned to you when we caught up last, but one of the reasons why I'm very enthusiastic about, supporting men who are victims of domestic violence is because, many years ago when, I had a childhood that wasn't ideal, but when I came out of that and back then, we're not even talking about mental health, but I was mentally not well after that experience of my childhood. But my early relationships with men were very violent, and I was the perpetrator of violence. And I'm very happy to talk about that. I'm very ashamed of it, but also very happy to talk about it in the respect that I needed help too. And I couldn't get help for myself because nobody would believe me. And people don't believe me still. I will stand on a stage and I will talk openly about it, and people come and they'll say, no, that wasn't you, that wasn't you. I'm so nice, I couldn't do that. But I know it, I've experienced it, and I know what it feels like. I know what leads to it. So um, I'm very aware and very enthusiastic about helping everybody in those situations.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's we've been calling for that because we've been calling for more support for women who are involved in domestic abuse, and we don't because it's one of those. I don't know if you're a big Doctor Who fan, but it's a bit one of those Daleks trying to go up the stairs type thing. You know, mentally and ideologically as well, politically, it's been very hard to actually get that accepted. And the thing is, I come back to the point that taking that inclusive, bigger picture approach. So when we're talking about male victims, I'm always keen to acknowledge that, there's more female victims and that we want better services for men, but also we want better services for women. And again, getting that tone and style right, I mean, and it isn't, and it's also obviously a core belief of mine that we need to keep everybody safe, and that's been good in enabling the charity and also my wider work in actually getting some traction because people see. I'd like to think they say, well, this guy's quite reasonable. He's banging the tin for men and boys, but not in a way that's going to harm or reduce any focus on women and girls. And
I think the focus has to come off that the us and them kind of
yeah, absolutely.
narrative that it's an everybody's issue, and each situation is it's very complex. It's not as simple as getting into a boxing ring and beating somebody up. It's a lot more complex than that. Again, I look at the what, but my brain always goes why. Why? And I was, where I grew up, I was a victim of violence by men, many men.
Yeah.
And, I feel so fortunate that somewhere in the world somebody gave me that questioning mind that went, yeah, that wasn't great for me, but what happened to them to make them do that? And, and that's what gives me that kind of insight is that I've seen it, I've experienced it, and I can understand why that happened. No one
Absolutely.
gets
And,
down. No
and
one gets down that far, though.
wow, exactly. That's interesting because that's what makes people like you and I do things. Why?
Yeah,
And I come back to my school. So you've got grammar school, middle class kids. There's a chippy guy sitting in the back row because if you remember at school, I always have this analogy. So at school, so you got I don't know 30 people in the school, and there's kind of 5 rows of six, and at the front are all the do-gooders, all the people who put their hands up first, and then you've got all the normal kids in the middle, and at the back you've got about three or four of the kind of violent kids, and at the other end of the back row you've got the cool kids like me, the chippy ones, who are always putting their hands up saying why teacher, but not in terms of being a pain in the backside, but it's like trying to get to the bottom of things,
Mm.
and trying to understand things and then trying to affect change. And I think it come so I always position people where I don't tell them, but I position people where I thought they were in the classroom, at school. But I think questioning that why is what drives people like you and I,
Mm.
because that drives, why we want to make a difference, not just to our own lives, but importantly to the lives of others and society in general. And
Yeah.
that question of why really it drives us. And I've thought about that, whether that's actually part of our socialization or it's just it's inbuilt. It's just part of our DNA or a combination. I've always tried to get to the source of that. It's been a challenge. I'm not quite sure. I need to do more reading, but the
It could
why
be a bit of a
question
DNA thing because I know,
driving.
like, I know as a child, I would annoy the crap out of everybody with, but why, and I'm still like that. I was sitting with a colleague today, he said, I love going to conferences with you because you're the one that asks those really difficult questions. And he said, do you do it on purpose? I said, I know, my brain just goes off. It's just
Yeah,
got whys all the time. And
yeah.
it's like almost impulsive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And when I speak, it's like God, not only have we got this chippy guy in, he sounds like a chimney sweep as well. As I said, he should be serving the lunch, not speaking.
Still have chimney sweeps in the UK.
No, 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 we don't. It's no, but everyone knows what they
Yeah.
are. I mean, they not really. I mean, there are some people, but they're not chimney sweeps in the chitty chitty bang bang type.
Yeah.
Sorry. But
So what else? I mean, we thank you for speaking so openly about that topic around violence against men because it is a really complex issue um, and I love the recognition that this isn't everybody's issue. We're talking about everybody here, and I listening to George that the 10 men. Um, and he speaks very openly about topics as well, um, especially around apologizing for everything that we speak about in men's health. And that really resonated with me because I know that sometimes, if I'm going to speak somewhere, I'll be asked not to talk about specific things because I might upset somebody. And then you realize that these are like, I've got 2 sons and they're so beautiful that I wouldn't want anything to happen to them. And that's what it's kind of saying. It's like apologizing. Don't talk about men's issues in a way that men could be victims of anything because that could upset people. It's like, yeah, no, I have to. Again, I love women. I'm a woman. I want to be safe. I want to be happy. I want to live in a world that supports women. And ironically, I work very firmly in the men's space, and I don't think I've ever come up against any man who has disadvantaged me or not supported me enthusiastically in the work that I do.
Yeah, and that's been an interesting area as well around the whole diversity, equality, inclusion space in the work. And I speak a bit about it on LinkedIn, and I'm a bit challenging with some because there's been a lot of complaints down the year, even more so about men not engaging in DEI activities and the need for male allyship. And I've pushed back and said, well, inclusion includes men too. Um,
Mhm.
and there's a gradual realization, and that's where men's health and things really starting to take shape in the UK. I mean, there's about 35 to 40 employers, big employers, who have male staff networks now.
Yeah.
So that's a big change in the last 5 years, and so employers are really starting to take men's health more seriously, but also inclusion is broader than that. And so I've been really pushing back on, all the talk of male allyship is important. I said, but who's being allies to men in work, including around their health. So I've been really pushing back on that, and also the expectation that the reason that some men aren't taking part in formal DEI activities means that men aren't interested in DEI at all. And for those diversity, equality, and inclusion initiatives. And I've pushed back and said, well, if you've got DEI initiatives that don't include men or see men as the problem, why would men take part in them? And I said, secondly, don't think that men are not supporting DEI just naturally. I mean, what man doesn't want their daughters, what dad doesn't want their daughters or sisters or mums to succeed, or their female friends. And I've not seen, said I've worked in charities, business, whatever. I've not seen men purposely, but block a woman from advancing in their career. I've just not seen it. And
I've seen
and
people do it. I mean, people do those things, but people do those things. It's not
yes, that's what I
necessarily
mean. Yeah,
gendered. But
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think we are moving the dial, and I'm very proud of the work that the sector does, or the part of the sector that I work in and you work in. It is shifting the dial. I remember a few
Yeah,
years ago searching up if I'm speaking at a DEI event around men. Well, not around men, but at a men's event, it will straight away come up with women's issues, women's
yeah,
issues, women's issues, occasionally race, but generally it will be about women's diversity and inclusion within and I'm talking about in the workplace context. But now I can see that that's moving a little bit to be more around what really is diversity. Diversity is not the color of your skin and what's between your legs. It's actually what happens in here.
mm,
And I'm pointing to my head, and it's diversity of thought and diversity of how we go out into the world. And I don't even know what your differences are because I don't know you. Like I don't know what happened to you when you were 5 or how you were hurt by your grade 6 teacher. I don't know that. That's part of what makes you different.
yeah, absolutely. And I think
Mm.
that there's been a real pushback about some of those phrases about toxic masculinity, man up, man flu. Somebody said to me, "Oh, I had man flu." I said, "No, you didn't have man flu. You just had flu."
Yeah, well, you
So,
were sick, you poor thing. You all right?
yeah, exactly. I mean, the worst one, again, and I push back on it a lot. Don't see it so much, but you see male, pale, and stale. I don't know if that's it,
Yeah,
and that,
it's
and that's one of those phrases in Southeast London where the words exactly
but
sound the
let's think a
same.
human being feels about themselves, like
Yeah,
even as an attractive sexual being, that you are pale, male, and stale. That is just so disparaging,
yeah, absolutely.
and hurtful. It's just hurtful. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, a point when somebody said it at a conference I was at, I said it's racist, ageist, and sexist,
yeah,
and as well as obviously, what impact. And I remember it was a woman was saying who was in her 50s, and I kind of spotted that she had a wedding ring on, and I said, I see you're married. Is that with a guy? And she said, yeah. I said, well, do you think your husband is male, pale, and stale, and pejorative, and is a negative, and is a barrier to you and to your family, and And she said, well, obviously not. And I went, well, but you've just said that he's male, pale, and stale. Why are you? That applies to your husband as well, and you could start to see the kind of realization, because I think a lot of it they get wrapped up in language and in movements, without actually thinking or stepping back about the actual impact of that. And I think part of our work is to if you like challenge in a very mild, constructive way, because I think a lot of this is that people are just not thinking.
No, no, it's thoughtless. Even today on that, when I was speaking to the fence men, I got a lot of out of these fence guys in a very
Mm,
short period of time, which is me and my YY. But one of them was talking about how I said, "Oh, do you have kids?" He's got a 6 month old and a 9 year old. And he and his wife, but he said his wife had experienced multiple miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies and things like that. And I said, how was that for you? Like you
mm.
experienced that too. He said, yeah, but my wife really, that was really her. So you lost your children too. He
Mm.
said, yeah, but
Yeah.
and this man carries all of those children that he lost inside of him without any pathway of understanding or recognition, because he is definitely pale, stale, and male.
Mm.
That would be him.
Yeah.
And parenting, I think, is one of those things as well that dads still are just babysitters for their kids, and they do that badly. They get instructions on how to be with their children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have children, so I haven't got that experience, but I know friends have, and I know that when issues like that have happened, that I know it's been devastating for them, but they've had that stiff upper lip, and
Yeah.
again, it's that it's a phrase that's not used a lot, but around kind of, I talked about sense of service and worth, but also a sense of chivalry, and which is a word that, almost like it's on the banned list now. But men will, the man's aspect or instinct is always, it's like, I'll bottle it up because I want to show all my concern and wrap my arms around, my wife, who's gone through this terrible, terrible
Yeah.
experience. So it's always kind of like that he's more concerned about his wife than his own
Yeah.
well-being, when obviously it should be equal.
Well, but
But
but so
again,
it should be, because that's his instinct, right? So if
that's
if
right, that's
if
right, and
that's
there's nothing wrong with that.
that piece, but then as a backdrop to that, there should be something that picks him up as well in our
Yes,
system. That
yeah,
plan should already
absolutely.
be in place. But as we were talking about today, women, especially around postnatal depression, they're very educated about that before they even think about having children, and it's always addressed all the way through the pregnancy. Whereas men also experience, paternal postnatal depression, and it's a biological thing. It's to do with testosterone, and we're still a far way from recognizing that, that men need to, and boys in school should be educated on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Too
again,
much. No, it's too late to talk about it once, a man's sitting on the floor of his baby's nursery crying and wanting to kill himself. It's a bit late to have that conversation. Well, it's not too
yeah,
late, but it could have been.
yeah, absolutely. And I know people who've had that as well, and suddenly, that the burden come back to full circle, if you like, the burden on them to maintain family finance is, the family finance. Again, they've got two people that they need to look after, or they innately feel that they need to look after, as well as, you know one chap felt that, he's no longer the center of attention in his um wife's life, understandably, and
That's
he
right,
just
but it's
wasn't
also
prepared
assumed
for
that
that.
men don't need to be loved and nurtured. So
Yeah,
who's loving that human being? Who's actually holding that person and being tender and gentle? And the amount of men that I sit with who just cried just because they want to freaking hold hands with somebody.
yeah,
They just want to hold. They just want to sit on the couch with their wife and be loved.
yeah.
And it's just heartbreaking that again is just assumed that men don't need that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, that's where we've got to get to society, and also, again, come back to the political narratives. That's why we need when it comes to, and there's again big campaigns really starting up in the UK around a whole issue around paternity, and that's where those men need to be, involved in, you know, prenatal, postnatal, and those conversations, because it's almost been up until recently that once a kind of woman is pregnant, the kind of whole focus is on the mother, and there's no focus or thought really around the father as well. And there's all sorts of assumptions that are made. I mean, you still see it at the school gates. I mean, I talk to guys who work from home, and perhaps their female partner works, in the office or away. So, the chaps at the school gates picking up the kids, might be a house husband, all of those kind of, different varieties of lifestyles now, which is really, really welcome. And sometimes it's kind of like, God, like, what's he doing here?
Yeah.
Um, and certainly I've spoken to men who felt very conscious that they're picking up the kids, and
Yeah.
like some mothers even viewing them with some suspicion as well.
Yeah.
So again, but things are moving.
Or they're being objectified,
Yeah, well,
So,
yeah, I mean,
there's a wonderful, wonderful man who lives in Manchester, Robin Hadley, and his whole life's work is around fatherlessness. So
yeah,
men who have not. Do you know Robin?
yeah, he's a great guy, great guy.
Beautiful man. I met him at the Men's Health World Congress in Borneo I was going to say last year, but now it's the year before because it was December 2023. And I've never really considered that as an issue for men. And yeah, he's tireless in his work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's a real world leader in that field.
yeah.
I have
Mm,
to say, and that's why it's important to come back. The academic issue about having academics working on research and getting that evidence base,
yeah.
because that really will and does influence how then services delivered, and ultimately, how men get support. And people like Robin have really helped to change the landscape in that area.
Yeah, yeah, it was great, and great to hear him speak at this conference as well. Because again, I spoke there too, and being amongst so many academics, from what you were saying before, it really resonated with me. That I mean, I'm interested in anything, so I can
Yeah.
actually sit down and listen to really dry research and make something up in my head. But yeah, when you bring stuff to life, like right, Robin has. I mean, Robin's done his research beautifully, but he also brings his personal experience
Mm.
into it and brings it to life and makes it really meaningful. And that combination is very rare.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. I can't believe that this is an hour and a half we have been. I was going to say chat. We haven't been chatting. We haven't been speaking. We haven't been debating. What would you call it?
A conversation, and a
Conversing.
two-way conversation as well,
Yeah, I
which
love
which
this.
yeah, which is good, because yeah, often I just waffling away, and I'm going off at all sorts of tangents and things like that. I think that's a pseudo politician in me, like the sound of my own voice.
Well, are you going to have another crack?
Well, it's. I haven't ruled it out. I mean, I'll be late 50s. I'll be about 57, 58 and time of the next general election. But it isn't just about the election. It's then if you get elected, it's 4 or 5 years. So, you're in your mid 60s and stuff like that. I may well do if my, local political party wouldn't, or if there's opportunities elsewhere. But the thing is, I'm making a lot of change without necessarily being elected. Men's health
Exactly.
strategy, for
Exactly.
example.
Mm,
A lot of reports, and I sit in front of Parliament committees and all sorts of things. So, 15 years ago, I was like really. Like being an MP was kind of like my big life goal, but but that still is a life goal. But making change in however I can do that is really important. I've had some personal accolades, got an OBE, I've got an honorary doctorate, for
I was supposed to
example.
cover
So
that in this interview as well. What were you awarded your OBE for?
well, that was for supporting male victims of domestic abuse. So
That
again,
is
part of the work.
amazing that that was recognised in that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. And I think it's not just because of the charity work, it's about changing the landscape. So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, it was. I mean, I'm the only one who's been specifically
yeah.
honored in that way for that particular
What year?
subject.
What year was that?
2019, and I got the honor with from Prince William, so that was
Oh,
at Buckingham
oh,
Palace.
congratulations.
So
That's great. And for something that is just so, that takes a lot of you to bring
yeah,
that forward. And and on that political thing, that's so demonstrative that you don't actually have to have a seat at the table to be making change.
yeah,
I remember Kate Carnell, she was the CEO of Beyond Blue, which is the big mental health charity here in Australia, very well known. And she said to me once, she said, Ray, don't get into politics. It's like having your hands tied behind your back when you really want to just do what you want to do. Um, she said you'll do better work outside of politics.
yeah, exactly. And I'll probably be in trouble anyway. I mean, I'll probably
Yeah, I'm glad we didn't
because
catch up in London actually, because we probably would have got into trouble.
well, political trial, I'll be saying, oh, you can't say that, and it's like, well, that's what I think.
Oops, I
So
just did, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But I no, I would have behaved, but I certainly see that the hands tied behind your back. I mean, I think a lot of it with the politics and having been working around MPs is just a time issue. That there's so many issues, both in parliaments and also dealing with local constituency issues. Problems that local people have that you have to fix. That a lot of it is just it's all consuming but also it's really hard. I've seen with some MPs to really focus on one or two issues. So I think the pressures on MPs and politicians in general is 10 times harder than people actually think.
Oh, absolutely, especially if they're in it for the right reason.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm. Well, final remarks, Mark?
I think, well, but basically, we've made huge progress on men's health, not only in terms of recognition and awareness, but also we're starting to see solutions, lots more charities, lots more initiatives, lot more men coming forward to get support. We just need to keep at it.
Words, and I plan on keeping on at it. And again, big shout out to the sector. Many of us do this work in our spare time, but we just make lots and lots and lots of spare time to get
Yeah,
this done. So, and it is a privilege and a pleasure to be able to do that and work with people just like you.
brilliant. Thank you, Ray. Much appreciated, and likewise as well.
Pleasure.